She leaned in close. Music was playing, glasses clinking, and she said, real quiet, "Daddy already has a wife. In another state." I kept smiling. I think someone was handing me champagne at that exact second. Or maybe it was sparkling water. No, it was champagne. Tall flute. Cold stem against my fingers. I didn't look at her right away. You learn that, as a father. You don't snap your head around when your daughter says something that could change the temperature of a room. You keep your face steady. Let the band finish the song. That was the engagement dinner. Downtown Toronto. Private room above the harbor. White tablecloths. Gold napkin rings that nobody notices unless they're paying the bill. I'm Mickle. Most folks just call me Uncle Mickle. I'm in my 40s, late 40s, I guess. 48. No, 47. I always add a year in my head for some reason. Anyway, my daughter's name is Alira. Only child. Always walked like she knew exactly where the sidewalk ended. That night she wore a deep green dress. Nothing flashy. Hairpin back. Calm smile. The kind of calm that, in hindsight, wasn't calm at all. Her fiancé, Armand. That's his name. Armand Varelli. Smooth voice. Clean cuffs. Owned logistics companies, warehouses, freight contracts. The kind of man who sends thank you baskets before you've even done him a favor. Everyone loved him. My sister called him polished. My brother-in-law said, "That's a builder right there." Even the older cousins nodded like they'd personally vetted his credit score. I didn't object. That's important. I didn't object. Because on paper, he was everything you'd want standing next to your daughter in wedding photos. Tall. Steady income. Didn't drink much. Looked people in the eye. And he shook my hand firm but not dominant. There's a difference. That dinner room smelled like lemon cleaner and roasted garlic. Big windows. Boats moving slow outside. You could hear the low hum of the air system if the music paused between songs. When Alira slipped her hand into my sleeve and said, "Walk with me," I figured she needed air. Or maybe she'd had too much wine. She doesn't drink much either. Never has. We stepped into the hallway. Carpet thick enough to swallow footsteps. Warm lighting. No one followed. She didn't waste time. "Dad, he has a wife in Ohio." Ohio. I remember because I thought she said Iowa at first. I almost corrected her. But no, she repeated it. Ohio. A suburb outside Cleveland. She'd found out 2 days before. I didn't ask how. Not right then. I watched her hands instead. She was holding her clutch purse so tight the seam at the corner was bending. That purse was her mother's. I noticed that before anything else. Funny what your brain grabs. I asked one thing. Just one. "Are you sure?" She nodded once. Not dramatic. Just a single nod. And then the band inside started up again. Some old Motown cover. People laughing. And I remember thinking, in that narrow hallway with the soft carpet and framed black and white photos of the harbor, that I had about 30 seconds to decide what kind of father I was going to be. Because if she was right, there were 80 guests inside celebrating a lie. And if she was wrong, well, that's where it sat. Right there. The thing about that night is, up until that hallway moment, everything felt settled, comfortable. The private dining room overlooked the water, and you could see the reflection of city lights stretching across the harbor like long, steady lines. Not flashy, just steady. That's the word I'd been using in my head about Armand for months. Steady. He'd met Alira at some industry fundraiser, logistics conference. I forget the exact event name. Something with supply chains, I think. She works in urban planning. Not glamorous, but solid work. They bonded over zoning laws and freight corridors. That's what she told me. I remember thinking, that's oddly practical romance. Their first dinner with me was at my place. Small bungalow in Scarborough. I grilled lamb chops that came out a little too charred on one side. I blamed the wind, but there wasn't much wind that evening. He didn't comment, just ate them. Asked about my contracting work. Listened. That's what impressed me. He listened. A lot of men in their 30s, well, he was 36 at the time. They talk about expansion, mergers, numbers. Armand talked about responsibility, about long-term freight routes, and how a missed shipment affects families waiting on medical supplies. He framed business like infrastructure for real people. Hard to argue with that. Elira looked relaxed around him. That mattered more than the resume. She dated before. A musician once. Name slips me. Raphael? No, that was someone else. Rowan. That's it. Rowan. Good kid, but drifted. Always chasing tours. Armand wasn't drift. He sent flowers to her office on random Tuesdays. He remembered my knee surgery anniversary, which is strange, now that I say it out loud. Why would he remember that? I must have mentioned it once over dinner. Or maybe Elira did. Still, there was one thing. Not big enough to challenge. Not something you point at in front of relatives. But I noticed it early. He traveled a lot. Ohio. Pennsylvania. Warehouse audits, he'd say. Expansion checks. Always short trips. 2 days here. 3 days there. And he never invited Elira along. Said they were all work. Now, I don't expect every business trip to be romantic. But when you're engaged, you find reasons to overlap schedules. That's just what people do when they're building something. I remember once asking him, casual as I could manage, "You ever think of consolidating some of that travel? Remote oversight." He smiled. Not defensive. Just calm. Some things you have to see in person, Mickle. That's what he called me. Never, sir. Always Mickle. At the time, I respected that. Felt modern. Equal. Looking back, well, I don't know if that's fair. Maybe it meant nothing. The engagement itself happened in early spring. Lakeshore walk. He'd hired a photographer, but pretended it was spontaneous. Elira showed me the photos later. Wind in her hair. Him on one knee. Water behind them. She looked genuinely surprised. I studied his face in those pictures. I zoomed in on my phone like a suspicious uncle in a crime documentary. I was looking for something. Nerves. Calculation. I didn't see it. And maybe that's the part that unsettles me most now. Not that he might have lied, but that I couldn't detect it. The dinner guest list was mostly family. Some of his business associates. A few of her co-workers. 82 people, actually. I remember because I counted chairs when I helped coordinate with the restaurant manager. 82 witnesses to a version of reality. Before she pulled me into that hallway, I just finished a small toast. Nothing grand. I don't do theatrical speeches. I said I was proud of her. That partnerships aren't built on fireworks, but on showing up when it's inconvenient. I even gestured toward Armand when I said it. He raised his glass. Confident. If I replay that moment in my head, and I have, more than I'd like to admit, I try to spot hesitation. A flicker. Something off. But the man looked clean. So when Elira told me about a wife in Ohio, it didn't collide with an existing suspicion. It landed on solid ground and cracked it open. She said she'd found photos. Social media traces. A property record. Same last name. Same birth date. Wedding registry archived online from 7 years ago. 7. I asked her then, in that hallway, "Why didn't you say something sooner?" She swallowed before answering. Said she wanted to be sure. Said she called a number linked to the Ohio address and hung up when a woman answered. That's when I felt the air system humming louder than the music. And here's the question I kept circling in my head, standing there while waitstaff walked past with trays of appetizers. If he was capable of that, how long had he been capable of it? Because people don't wake up one Tuesday and accidentally start a second life. At least, I don't think they do. Maybe you've known someone who has. I hadn't. Not this close. The room behind us was still celebrating. My cousins laughing too loud. My sister probably rearranging centerpieces no one else noticed. And my daughter was asking me, without saying it directly, whether we were about to detonate her future in front of everyone. I remember glancing toward the door handle. I remember thinking, once we walk back in, there's no neutral ground left. And I still hadn't decided which version of the truth we were standing on. We didn't go back in right away. That's what people assume when I tell this part, that I stormed in or froze or demanded proof. I didn't. We stayed in that hallway longer than felt appropriate for an engaged couple's father and bride-to-be to disappear. I asked her to walk with me downstairs. There was a small lobby near the elevators. Marble floor. Too shiny. The kind of shine that shows scuff marks if you look close. A potted plant by the window that probably cost more than my first truck. We sat on one of those low leather benches. I kept my voice even. "Show me." She pulled out her phone. Hand steady now. Too steady. That bothered me more than if she'd been shaking. First, a screenshot. A wedding photo from 7 years ago. Armand. Same jawline. Same slight bend in his left eyebrow. I'd noticed that before when he concentrated. Standing beside a woman in a simple ivory dress. Backyard setting. Ohio address tagged. The last name was Varelli. Not common. I felt my stomach tighten, not drop. Tighten. Like bracing. I asked, could it be a cousin? Same name, different Armand. She shook her head. Birthdate matches, Dad. She showed me a public business filing. Same middle initial. Same logistics company listed as prior employment. One piece at a time. No drama. Just data. I remember thinking that if this were a misunderstanding, it would unravel quickly. Some clerical overlap. Some mistaken identity. I clung to that idea for maybe 30 seconds. Then she showed me a property tax record. Joint ownership. Armand Varelli and a woman named Maricel Varelli. Purchased 5 years ago. Suburb outside Cleveland. 5. Which meant he'd been expanding freight routes there around the same time. I leaned back against the wall. Cold marble through my suit jacket. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. What I felt was calculation. Because here's the thing about suspicion. It's not the same as proof. Screenshots can be outdated. People separate. Legal paperwork lingers. Names overlap. So I asked her something that probably sounded colder than I intended. Have you asked him? She looked at me like I'd suggested something reckless. No, not yet. Good. Because once you confront someone who's lying, if they are lying, they adjust their story. They close doors you didn't know were open. I told her we needed confirmation, not confrontation. There's a difference. She exhaled slow. I called the house phone yesterday, she said. A woman answered. I hung up. Did she say his name? No. That detail stuck. Because if a man is leading 2 lives, the cracks usually show in small habits. Missed holidays. Inconsistent stories. Unreachable hours. I started rewinding months in my head. He'd missed Thanksgiving. Said he had to oversee an emergency shipment in Pennsylvania. That checked out at the time. He'd sent a catered dessert tray as apology. He never stayed overnight at Alira's condo more than 3 consecutive nights. Always had a reason to leave. Early meeting. Flight. Inspection. I'd noticed that pattern. I just filed it under ambitious businessman. Maybe that was convenient. I remember asking her, has he ever introduced you to his parents? She hesitated. They're private, she said. They live abroad. Abroad where? I realized I didn't know. That's when the unease shifted. Not into panic. Into structure. We needed to verify whether that Ohio marriage was active. Whether there were children. Whether there was overlap. And here's where I misstepped. Or maybe I didn't. I still debate this. I told her to go back upstairs and act normal. She blinked at me. You want me to smile? Yes. I said it firm. Because if he sensed we were onto something, he could erase evidence. Lock accounts. Delete traces. People who maintain parallel lives tend to be organized. She stared at the marble floor for a long second. Then she nodded. Before we stood up, I asked one more thing. Do you want this to be false? She didn't answer right away. I want clarity, she said. That was my daughter. Not naive. Not hysterical. Just precise. We rode the elevator back up in silence. I watched the floor numbers light up. 6, 7, 8. When the doors opened, the music was louder than before. Someone had started a chant near the bar. Glasses raised. Armand was near the center of the room, laughing with my cousin Dario. He looked relaxed. One hand in his pocket. He saw us and lifted his glass slightly. I lifted mine back. And in that split second, I realized I was studying him not as a future son-in-law, but as a man who might be running 2 households with the same steady smile. The dilemma settled in sharp. Do I protect my daughter quietly and investigate, or do I protect her publicly and risk being wrong in front of 82 people? I chose quiet, for now, and I hated how natural that decision felt. That night didn't explode. That's the strange part. We finished the dinner. Dessert was served, some layered hazelnut thing with gold flakes on top. People clapped when the band slowed down. Armand kissed Elira's cheek for photos. I watched his hand rest at the small of her back like it belonged there. I drove home alone after. Windows down even though it was colder than I expected. Or maybe it wasn't that cold. Early spring in Toronto does that. Tricks you. I remember gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. The next morning, I didn't call him. I didn't call anyone. I went to work. Framing job in North York. Measured twice, cut once. Routine steadies you. But I kept checking my phone in between boards, waiting for Alira to text something new. She didn't. Around noon, I called in a favor. I have a friend, not a detective exactly, but he works in compliance for a financial firm. Name's Corvin. Quiet guy. Sees patterns for a living. I asked him a general question first. Hypothetical. If someone owns property jointly in another state, is that easily verifiable? He didn't ask why. Just said yes. Public records. Marriage licenses too, depending on the county. By evening, he called me back. Active marriage license, he said. Filed 7 years ago. No divorce record attached. Active. That word landed heavy. He added something else. There were 2 children listed in school enrollment records, tied to that Ohio address. Ages 5 and 3. 5 and 3. Which meant at least one of those kids was born after Armand started dating my daughter. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the wood grain. I traced a knot in the surface with my thumb. 2 children. I remember thinking it might be an old record. Maybe separated, but not legally processed. But school enrollment updates yearly. Corvin wouldn't have mentioned it unless it was current. I called Alira. She answered on the first ring. I didn't ease into it. It's active, I said. Silence on her end. Not crying. Not breathing heavy. Just silence. And there are kids. That's when I heard her inhale sharp. I expected anger. Instead she asked, very quietly, "Are you sure?" Yes. I hated that I was sure. She said she needed to sit down. I could hear movement, maybe a chair scraping. Or maybe that's my memory filling in sound. No, I'm pretty certain I heard it. She didn't yell. She didn't swear. She asked one question. How long do we wait before confronting him? We. That word told me she wasn't running from it. I told her we needed something undeniable. Something he couldn't deflect. Screenshots and records could be spun. But voices, direct confirmation. I suggested calling that Ohio number again. This time not hanging up. She hesitated. I don't want to hurt another woman if she doesn't know. That thought hadn't crossed my mind yet. I paused. She was right. If this other woman believed she was married to a faithful man, our call would detonate her life too. But if she already knew, if they were in some arrangement, we needed to understand it. 2 days passed before Alira made the call. She asked me to sit with her. We were at her condo. Late afternoon. Sun coming through the blinds in thin lines across the floor. Her engagement ring was on the coffee table, not her hand. That detail still sticks. She dialed. Put it on speaker. It rang 4 times. A woman answered. Soft voice. Slight Midwestern accent. Hello. Alira swallowed but didn't hang up this time. Hi, is this Maricel Varelli? A pause. Yes. My name is Alira. She stopped. Regrouped. I'm engaged to Armand Varelli. Silence. Longer this time. Then the woman said evenly, You're what? The rest came out in fragments. Dates. Overlapping timelines. Travel explanations that mirrored each other almost exactly. Emergency shipments. Last-minute audits. Business expansions. Maricel didn't sound surprised. She sounded tired. That's the word. Tired. She confirmed they were still married. Still living together. She said Armand traveled for work about 10 days each month. 10. Which lined up almost perfectly with his trips to Toronto. I watched my daughter's face as the pieces arranged themselves without effort. No theatrics. Just alignment. When the call ended, the room felt smaller. Not dramatic, just quieter. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than before. Alira picked up the engagement ring and turned it between her fingers. The diamond caught the light in sharp flashes. I don't want to scream at him, she said. I want him to look at me and say it. That was her lowest point, I think. Not when she cried, because she didn't. Not when she shook, because she didn't. It was that controlled sentence. I realized then that this wasn't just betrayal. It was architecture. He had constructed parallel trust. and my daughter had been one wing of it. I didn't know yet how we'd bring it down, but I knew it wasn't going to be loud. Not at first. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was pacing. I wasn't. I lay still, stared at the ceiling fan turning slow, counted rotations at one point, lost track after 30 or so. Or maybe it was 50. Doesn't matter. What kept looping wasn't anger. It was structure. If Armand had maintained a marriage in Ohio with 2 children and an engagement in Toronto, that required calendars, separate phones, probably, financial partitions, stories rehearsed enough to survive casual conversation. That's not sloppy behavior. That's deliberate. The next morning, I met Alira at a small diner near her condo. Vinyl booths. Coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The place smelled like butter and burnt toast. She looked steady. Pale maybe, but composed. We didn't waste time. I don't want a shouting match, she said. I want exposure. Exposure. That word shifted the air between us. I asked her what she meant. I want him to answer in front of both of us, she said. Me and her. Meaning Maricel. I leaned back. The booth creaked. That's not simple, I told her. Coordinating 2 states. 2 households. Travel logistics. She nodded. I've already spoken to her again. That caught me off guard. She'd called Maricel the night before, after I left. They'd talked for almost an hour. Compared timelines. Confirmed overlaps. Shared dates of anniversaries that apparently fell within weeks of each other. 2 rings. 2 promises. Maricel wasn't hysterical either. That detail surprised me again. I think I expected chaos from the other side. Instead, she sounded methodical. She'd suspected something for years, apparently. Long business trips. Inconsistent stories about warehouse expansions in Canada. Which meant he'd used us as his alibi. I felt heat rise in my chest then. Not explosive. Just steady heat. Alira said Maricel wanted clarity too. Not revenge. Not public humiliation. Clarity. We discussed options. Confront him privately in Toronto. He could deny, claim separation, fabricate paperwork. Confront him publicly at a family gathering. Risk collateral damage. Relatives dragged into something they didn't choose. Or coordinate a meeting where both women were present. No room for narrative bending. That was the path Alira preferred. I hesitated. Not because it was wrong. Because it was precise. Precision requires patience. We needed him in one place, unaware, without time to craft a defense. I suggested inviting him to dinner at Alira's condo under normal pretense. Nothing unusual. Meanwhile, Maricel would fly in quietly. She'd never been to Toronto, which almost made the symmetry cleaner. There was a moment brief, where I questioned whether we were escalating too far. 2 women confronting a man in an enclosed space. Emotions unpredictable. I said that out loud. Are we cornering him? I asked. Alira met my eyes. Or are we removing his escape routes? That's the line that settled it for me. Still, I added one condition. No shouting. No throwing objects. No physical contact. If he attempted to leave, we would let him. We weren't trapping him. We were presenting reality. There's a fine line there. I remember stirring my coffee long after the sugar dissolved. The spoon clinked against the ceramic in uneven rhythm. Part of me wondered if I should handle it alone. Call him man-to-man. Demand explanation. But that would reduce it to a contest of dominance. This wasn't about me. It was about truth between the people directly affected. We coordinated with Maricel over the next 3 days. She booked a discreet flight. Didn't tell Armand she was traveling. Told him she was visiting her sister in Columbus. He believed it. That detail, how easily he believed it, reinforced everything. The dinner was set for Friday evening. Casual. Alira texted him that she wanted to talk about wedding venue deposits. Normal pre-wedding logistics. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji and a heart. A heart. I almost laughed when she showed me that. On Friday afternoon, I helped rearrange her condo living room slightly. Not dramatically. Just moved the armchair closer to the couch. Made sure there were clear sightlines. Maricel arrived an hour early. Smaller than I expected. Dark hair pulled back tight. She carried herself like someone used to holding composure in front of children. The first few minutes between her and Alira were quiet. No hostility. No accusations. Just two women observing the same fracture from different angles. I stayed mostly silent. At one point, I stepped into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, listening to the low hum of traffic outside 12 floors up. I asked myself something then. Was this about punishment? Or was it about preventing further damage? If it leaned toward punishment, I'd walk away. I'm not interested in spectacle. But when I returned to the living room and saw both women sitting upright, steady, waiting, I understood. This was about ending a pattern. Armand texted that he was 5 minutes away. Alira placed the engagement ring back on her finger, not as commitment, as evidence. And for the first time since that hallway in the restaurant, I felt completely calm. Cold calm. There's a difference. Tell me this. If you were in my position, would you have stepped back at that point? Or stayed exactly where I was? I stayed. The knock came right on time. 3 taps. Even rhythm. Alira looked at me once. Not for permission. Just acknowledgement. Then she opened the door. Armand stepped in smiling, carrying a bottle of wine. Dark suit. No tie this time. Casual fiancé energy. He kissed her cheek. Then he saw Maricel. He didn't drop the bottle. I'll give him that. But his shoulders stiffened. Just slightly. Most people wouldn't catch it. I did. There was a long second where no one spoke. Then Maricel said his name. Not loud. Not angry. Just Armand. He blinked twice. Looked at Alira. Then at me. Then back at Maricel. What's this? He asked. Voice controlled. I'll admit, impressive control. Alira didn't raise her voice. Tell us, she said. That was it. Tell us. He set the wine on the counter. Took a slow breath. I noticed a vein in his temple pulsing. Small detail. But it was there. He tried the separation angle first. We've been complicated for a while, he said, gesturing vaguely toward Maricel. Things haven't been stable. Maricel didn't react. Just folded her hands in her lap. Are you divorced? She asked. No, he admitted. There it was. Clean. Alira didn't flinch. Are you separated? A pause. Not legally. Not legally. I remember thinking how carefully he was choosing qualifiers. He shifted his weight, as if recalculating. I was going to tell you, he said to Alira. That line always comes out eventually. When? She asked. Silence. He didn't answer. Instead, he pivoted. Said he felt trapped in a marriage that had grown distant. Said he'd found connection again. Said he was working toward transitioning. Transitioning. That word hung in the air like something rehearsed. I stepped forward then. Not aggressive. Just present. You proposed while still living with your wife. I said. With children in that house. His jaw tightened. They're young, he said quietly. I didn't want to disrupt their stability until I had a plan. I almost asked what plan required 2 engagement rings. But I stopped myself. Here's where I questioned whether I was going too far by staying in the room. Maybe this needed to be just the 3 of them. Maybe my presence shifted power dynamics. I said that out loud. If I need to leave, I will. Alira shook her head. Stay. So I stayed. Maricel asked him one thing that cut cleaner than anything else. Did you love her? He looked at Alira. Yes. No hesitation. And me? Maricel asked. A longer pause. Yes. 2 yes. That was the moment the architecture collapsed. Not in shouting. Not in chaos. Just in impossibility. You can't build a single future on 2 simultaneous vows without someone becoming expendable. Alira reached up slowly and removed the engagement ring. Placed it on the coffee table. The diamond caught the overhead light. I'm not a transition, she said. For words. Armand exhaled sharply, like he'd been holding breath since he walked in. He tried again, said he could fix it. Said he'd file papers immediately. Said love was complicated. No one raised their voice. No one cried. Maricel stood up first. You don't get to choose the timeline anymore, she said. That sentence landed harder than anything shouted. Armand looked smaller then. Not physically. Just narrowed. He asked if we were recording him. We weren't. He glanced toward the door. I stepped aside without blocking it. You're free to leave, I said. He hesitated, maybe expecting resistance. There wasn't any. After a few seconds, he picked up his coat, left the wine behind. When the door closed, The room felt strangely ordinary. City noise outside. A car horn in the distance. The refrigerator humming again. No fireworks. Just air. I looked at my daughter. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't collapsing. She just stood there, staring at the empty doorway, as if recalibrating the shape of her own life. And for the first time that week, I wasn't calculating anymore. It was done. The days after weren't dramatic. That surprises people when they hear the story. They expect police reports or viral posts or someone throwing belongings off a balcony. None of that happened. Armand sent messages at first. Long ones. Paragraphs about confusion, about being misunderstood, about loving them both in different ways. I read one over Alira's shoulder. It was structured like a business proposal. Bullet points. Timelines. She didn't respond. Maricel flew back to Ohio the next morning. Before she left, she and Alira had coffee together downstairs in the lobby cafe. I watched from a distance. They didn't hug. They didn't exchange numbers in some dramatic solidarity gesture. They just nodded at each other. Two women who now shared a very specific kind of knowledge. A week later, Maricel filed for divorce. That part moved faster than I expected. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe the groundwork had been laid long before we entered the picture. Armand's messages shifted tone when he realized there would be no private reconciliation. First apologetic, then defensive, then quiet. By the third week, silence. The engagement dinner guests found out gradually, not from social media. Alira didn't post anything cryptic. She simply canceled the wedding venue deposit. When relatives asked, she told them the truth in one sentence. He was still married. No embellishment. I had to answer a few calls from family members who wanted more detail. My sister was furious, not at Alira, but at the embarrassment of it all. That bothered me. Embarrassment. As if reputation were the primary injury. I corrected her gently. This isn't about optics. She quieted down after that. I'll admit something here, and I'm not proud of it. Part of me replayed that engagement toast in my head more than once. The words I'd said about partnerships and showing up when it's inconvenient. I wondered if I'd missed something obvious. A twitch. A contradiction. Maybe I should have dug earlier. Asked harder questions about those Ohio trips. But then I catch myself. Hindsight edits clean lines into messy moments. At the time, there wasn't enough friction to justify suspicion. Or maybe there was, and I chose comfort. I'm not entirely sure. That's the part one still examine. Alira moved through the aftermath with a kind of quiet efficiency. Return gifts. Thank you notes rewritten into polite closures. The engagement photos were deleted from her phone. Not ceremonially. Just one evening, while watching television, I remember hearing the faint clicking of the screen as she scrolled. Click, click, gone. A month later, I stopped by her condo to fix a loose cabinet hinge. Ordinary errand. The place smelled like fresh paint. She'd repainted the living room walls. Soft gray instead of cream. Needed a reset, she said. We sat at her small kitchen table afterward. No wine. Just tea. I asked her something I'd been holding. If you had known earlier, if you'd noticed the travel pattern sooner, would you have confronted him alone? She thought about it. I don't know, she said. Maybe I needed to see how far he'd go. That sentence stayed with me. How far he'd go. Because in a strange way, the confrontation wasn't about catching him. It was about revealing the full extent of his willingness to divide his life. Would I handle it differently now? I've asked myself that more than once. Maybe I would have insisted on deeper background checks before the engagement. Maybe I would have trusted my discomfort about those frequent trips. But there's a danger in over-policing the people our children choose. You can protect, or you can control. The line shifts easily. And if I confronted him privately, without Maricel present, he might have reshaped the story again, offered selective truth, bought time. The way it unfolded left no narrative wiggle room. That matters. Alira didn't retreat from dating altogether. That's something I'm grateful for. She took time, yes. Focused on work. Started volunteering with a housing nonprofit on weekends. One evening, maybe 3 months later, she mentioned casually that she'd gone on a coffee date. I pretended not to overreact. Just nodded. It wasn't dramatic healing. It was incremental. And as for Armand, I heard through someone, a mutual business contact, that his Ohio house went up for sale. I don't know where he lives now. I didn't look it up. Some chapters don't need updates. The Harbor restaurant still operates. I drove past it once and caught myself glancing up at the windows of that private dining room. I didn't feel anger, just distance. If I had stepped back that Friday night, if I'd left the room, would the outcome have changed? Possibly not. But I think my presence grounded the edges, kept it from tipping into chaos. Still, I wonder, would you have stayed in that room, or let it unfold without you? I don't know if there's a perfect answer. There rarely is. I've had a lot of time to think about that hallway, the one outside the engagement dinner, the carpet thick enough to swallow footsteps, the framed harbor photos no one really studies, because that was the pivot. Not the confrontation, not the phone call. The pivot was that moment when my daughter leaned in and told me something that could have burned the whole evening down, and I chose not to light the match right there. Some people have told me I should have marched back in, grabbed a microphone, and exposed him in front of 82 guests. Made an example out of him. Maybe. But I keep coming back to this. Truth doesn't need an audience to be real. It just needs to be faced. And facing it quietly gave Alira control. It gave Maricel space. It kept the damage contained to the people directly involved. There's something I haven't said yet. A week after the confrontation, I was cleaning out my garage, moving old paint cans around. Found a small box of things from when Alira was a kid, school drawings, a cracked trophy from a middle school debate competition. Inside that box was a photo of her at maybe 8 years old, standing beside me at the lakeshore, wind pushing her hair sideways. She had that same steady expression she wore at the condo when she placed a ring on the table. I sat on the concrete floor for a while holding that photo. I realized something simple. My job was never to prevent her from encountering liars. It was to make sure she never felt alone when she did. That's different. We can't screen every future son-in-law. We can't anticipate every concealed marriage or rehearsed explanation. People who maintain double lives don't advertise the seams. But we can model steadiness. We can show our kids what it looks like to pause instead of explode, to gather facts instead of grabbing microphones. Now, I won't pretend this didn't leave marks. Alira told me months later that sometimes she still second-guessed her instincts, that she'd replay small moments, a canceled weekend, a vague answer, and wonder how she let it slide. I told her something I believe more strongly now than I did then. Trusting someone is not foolish. Ignoring clear evidences. And she didn't ignore evidence once she had it. There's a difference. As for me, I've examined my own part in it. That early flicker of unease about his travel, the way I filed it away under ambitious. Was that laziness? Or simply respecting boundaries? I still don't have a neat conclusion. Life doesn't wrap itself in clean lessons. But I do know this. Exposure without cruelty is possible. Confrontation without shouting is possible. Ending something without destroying yourself in the process is possible. It requires patience. It requires restraint. And sometimes it requires sitting in a hallway while a band plays Motown behind a closed door, deciding not to panic. So let me ask you something. When loyalty and self-respect collide, which one should bend first? There isn't a single right answer. Depends on the situation. Depends on the cost. But I've come to believe that loyalty to someone who is dividing their life isn't loyalty at all. It's participation. Alira didn't participate. Maricel stopped participating. And I stood where I needed to stand. That's enough for me. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Uncle Mickle's voice travels. Truth handled with restraint carries more weight than spectacle ever could.